You're listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Our efforts to educate and unite the church are made possible thanks to our sponsors on Patreon. Please consider joining them for $3 a month. This episode's a little bit special. We did this one in collaboration with our other podcast, Systematic Geekology. So your regular host, Joshua and TJ, will not, but rather, Will Rose and Christian Ashley will be interviewing Andrew Gillsmith, a Catholic author who recently wrote a sci-fi book, Our Lady of the Artilects. We hope you enjoy the show.
Hello, friends. Welcome to Systematic Geekology. We are your priests to the geeks, and man, do we have a fun episode today. It's a good old team up, mashup. We're teaming up with the Whole Church Podcast to talk with a really cool person who wrote a really cool book that I can't wait to talk about. So today we're Systematic Geekology, and there's things we geek out on. We're the priest to the geeks. There's no bait and switch. There's no hidden agenda. It's just like, man, what do you geek out on? And what are the questions that these things that we geek out on raises to the surface or helps us focus in on? And it's no secret that we're big fans of sci-fi around here, novels and video games and movies and comics. And so today we're talking with a sci-fi author. And I can't wait to dive into the book that he wrote and learn more about his story of faith. And I think the reason we're teaming up with Whole Church as well, because the questions that this book lifts up or holds up the mirror to is really important for, I think, the vitality and the health of the whole church and the unity we can have within Christianity itself with our different denominations and traditions and kind of the spectrum of faith. I think is really going to help open up some good questions and exploration with all those things. So welcome. Glad you're here. Let's get into the episode. Let's jump right in.
Sounds good. I'm excited to be here.
All right. The voice you hear there is Andrew Gillsmith. Andrew, we're glad that you're here. The name of your book is Our Lady of the Articulates. I'm saying that right?
Artilects.
Artilects.
Yeah.
Artilects. See, there you go. And we'll get into that just a little bit. And then we also have Christian here. Christian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Will. How about you?
We're good. We're good. So at Systematic Geekology, we usually share those things that we're kind of geeking out on to kind of raise our geek cred. But today, a little different question. Want to ask, since we're getting ready to talk about a pretty neat sci-fi book, wanted to ask, what's your favorite sci-fi fandom? And we'll go first, Andrew, to let you think about it a little bit. But Christian, so if you had to nail down like your favorite sci-fi fandom or genre, what would that be for you?
I mean, it's Star Wars, no question, but in the interest of fairness to other series out there, since Star Wars is sci-fi fantasy, I would say it would be either Mass Effect or the Mobile Suit Gundam series.
Cool.
Mass Effect, I love the way they play with science, how they base things around the element zero to propel themselves across multiple worlds and, dealing with cycles of life and death and stuff like that. Really interesting. Mobile Suit Gundam is one of those things too that explores the depths of humanity, like why we continue pursuing things like war. It's a wonderful series to check out. Very deep to get into with the different AUs and all that, but well worth it.
Now, is Mass Effect is that an anime or a video game? Where does that originate and then
that is a video game series.
Mm-hmm.
Came out, I believe, when I was in high school forever ago. And it has 1, 2, and 3 and Andromeda, which some people don't like as much. It's okay.
Nice. Yeah, it's no secret that I'm the Star Wars guy here on the podcast, and really kind of why Systematic Geekology even exists is because I was on Whole Church talking about a God Loves Geeks book club that I started in my church, and where we talk about Star Wars and Marvel. So Star Wars, my first love of sci-fi and geekdom, but I also say just kind of in light of the book we're getting ready to talk about, I really like the Blade Runner movies and series as well. When I was a kid and these things came out, like I was just really stoked that like Han Solo was in a different movie other than like Star Wars. And so Harrison Ford is in this Blade Runner. And I remember seeing that. I was like, wait a minute, why is this so slow? Why aren't there lightsabers and lasers and things happening? And so I didn't like it at first because it's just so drawn out and just hold on the scenes for way too long. But as I got older, man, just the way that it gets into kind of the ethical question and the bioethics and the sci-fi of what it means to be human with these replicants, with this AI, with these robots, and what that pushes and kind of these ethical dilemmas and how robots and humans can live together. Great questions. And so I love that series, and I've gone back and watched it many a time. It's based off Philip K. Dick's book. I think it's called Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is the original short story that he wrote that led into the Blade Runner series. So if you're looking for a good kind of book that will lead into that, that's a good one to read. So Andrew, how about you, buddy?
Well, look, and this will probably be a big theme, through our conversation. I'm pretty ecumenical when it comes to sci-fi. I mean, I like a lot of stuff. I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and always have been. But I think I'm going to cop out and pick two.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one is classic and one is a little bit newer. But I love them both so much. The classic one is Dune, by Frank Herbert. I mean, that to me, when I read that, as a younger person, was kind of like a life-changing book, right? I mean, it was, just the philosophy, the inclusion of like religion and faith, right, in this distant future, like where humanity is, kind of spread out amongst the stars, was I just thought was really cool. And the ideas that Herbert plays with, around like messianic figures and the nature of power, right, the nature of religious movements, fate, destiny, all that stuff. It was just great stuff. I mean, I love it. The newer one that I really, really liked was The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. And in fact, like in a lot of ways, I think that motivated me to start finally writing more than almost anything else, because I got so into the show. And, the show was on Sci-Fi originally, the Sci-Fi Channel, and it got canceled because that's, what happens to great sci-fi shows. And the fans of The Expanse like rallied around this show and were like, we are not going to let this thing die. And they created this whole like Save the Expanse campaign on Twitter, which I changed my Twitter to Andrew, Save the Expanse, Kill Smith. Somebody hired a plane to have a sign fly around the Amazon headquarters 24 hours a day saying, Jeff Bezos, please save the Expanse. And it worked. It worked. They actually did it. And it was like, it felt so good. Like, I'm an only child. I'm like a little bit of a loner, but like, it was like the first time that I really like felt like I was part of like a fandom community, that like did something. But The Expanse is amazing. It's just,
I've heard great things about that show and tried to get into a little bit, but then of course other things got in the way. And so it's out there in my queue. It's out there, hanging out to one day pick back up again and run with it. But I like the great reference to Dune. And when I knew the remake, I remember the movie as a kid. It's just Sting was in it, and that's the only thing I can remember. But then
that was a weird movie. That was a trippy movie.
Yes. Super weird, trippy movie. And then when I knew they were remaking the movie, I was like, I'm going to really sit down and read this like huge book, Dune. And so I got through most of it and read it. And as I was reading it, and then as this movie was coming out, I realized how much George Lucas stole from Dune for Star Wars in terms of the sand planet and the messianic and the religious and the mysticism. I was like, oh my gosh.
I mean, I love Star Wars. I love Lucas. And he, it's a totally different vibe. But I mean, I think Frank Herbert sued him at one point. I was talking about it, right? I don't know. But like,
you can see why.
Yeah.
100%.
Dune's the OG Star Wars.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Can't wait for part 2 of that movie too. Yeah. My family who went to go see it with, I thought they kind of knew it was going to be a part 2, like a 2-parter. They couldn't fit that whole book into one movie, but when it ended, they're like, "What? That was the worst ending ever." I'm like, "No, there's another one." Well, cool. Yeah, great stuff. Yeah, sci-fi. We love it. Andrew, tell us a little bit about your story in a nutshell, like who you are, what you do, your story of faith, and eventually what led you to write a novel. Like we all, us geeks, have ideas in our head and dream of one day writing our own sci-fi novel or comic book or directing our own movie or designing our own video game. But for you, what's your story in a nutshell? How did it get to this point?
Gosh. Well, I guess I'll take the easy way and talk about the story of the book first, because the faith journey, I think, would be a longer story. Happy to get into it
Yeah.
If that's where we go with this. But
Mm-hmm.
I had actually just finished reading The Expanse.
Mm-hmm.
This was several years ago, and I loved it. I mean, I absolutely loved the series. I think like always, right? The books are better than the show.
Sure.
The characters are more interesting. There's just, there's more left to the imagination. But it left me feeling, the conclusion of that series left me feeling the way that I often have felt reading a lot of modern science fiction, which is a little dry, right? I mean, you're dealing typically, certainly in the case of The Expanse, with like these huge questions about, the nature of life itself, of consciousness, of the human spirit, and there's I think a long and interesting and fun tradition of existential dread, in science fiction, right?
Uh-huh.
But existential dread on its own, can only like go so far, right? I mean, there's got to be a resolution. There's got to be meaning, to me anyway, meaning and purpose to it. Otherwise, you're left, like I often feel at the end of a sci-fi series, thinking, well, that was really a great ride, but like I don't know that I feel better. I don't feel edified, for lack of a better term, at the end of it. And
where's the hope? Where's the hope? Yeah.
Right. And again, that's not to say that there isn't hope at the end of The Expanse. I don't want to spoil it. The last thing in the world I want to do is like insult it or, anything like that, because I just think it's incredible creative work. But I thought, you know what, like I want to write something, and I want to see if I can write something that, does deal with these big existential questions, but that actually brings God into it, right? Like that reflects the universe and reality the way that I understand it, and do it in a way that would not be preachy, because like I just am not interested in that. I mean, there's plenty of stuff out there. If that's what you're interested in, that's great. I'm not interested in that. I like sci-fi, and I wanted to tell a really cool, fun, interesting sci-fi story that happened to also deal with questions of faith.
Nice. So yeah, your faith story was, share with us, and especially our kind of whole church listeners, is a part of that story of trying to think. Here we have on this, recording a Baptist seminarian, a Lutheran pastor, and a Roman Catholic together talking about sci-fi and geeking out together. And if that's not a picture icon of whole church, I don't know what is. But like, what was your upbringing a little bit, and then kind of where your faith is now? And then you've already shared that inspired you to write your own sci-fi story that integrates your faith into that. But share us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up, Midwestern Methodist. I didn't really know what that meant, to be honest with you. I mean, I went to an evangelical school for the first through sixth grade, I think it was, and then to a different school after that. So I had kind of, a little bit of like evangelical Christian, I guess, theology, but my practice was Methodist, right? And when I was a teenager, when I was 14, my mom was diagnosed with brain cancer, and I was really, really close to my mom. I mean, just we were best friends, and like a lot of kids, I think, that go through something like that, like that kind of trauma. I mean, it had its effect on me. I became very angry at the world, at other people, at God, and it kind of set me on a course toward willful atheism, I guess I would say, right? Where it was like it wasn't that I just looked at all the evidence, was like I don't find any evidence for God. I'm very logically, rationally concluding that, that this is a purposeless universe, blah, blah, blah. It was like, no, I'm pissed off. And, I'm going to choose this. This is the way that I'm going to see the world. And I went through that for a while. Actually, when I went to college, I majored in religion, which is a great way to become an atheist. And I knew it. And so that's why I did it. But I could never completely shake my faith. Like I was always just kind of there, kind of in the background, right? Over time, I started to kind of claw my way back to it. And there were a couple of things that happened that were really deeply influential for me. One of them was just watching the global witness of Pope John Paul II, right? Who I found him fascinating. I mean, he was this old, sick man who would go stand in the face of like, grave evil, right? And did so fearlessly. And the way that he spoke was just so brilliant. I mean, he was such a brilliant man, beyond being, I think, a holy man. I thought, well, that's really interesting. Like there's something to that.
Nice.
And the other thing was I went, when I was living in New York, I don't even know what caused me to do this, but I ended up going one time. There's a church here called the Holy Innocents. It's a Catholic church in Midtown, one of a gazillion, but they were having a Latin mass. And I just wanted to see it. Like, I just wanted to see what it was like. And I knew nothing. I didn't understand it. I didn't know anything about what was happening in front of me, but I watched from the back of the scene. I watched this scene, this liturgy, and the reverence of it and the beauty of it. And I bawled. I just sat back in the back of the church crying. And I didn't immediately become a Catholic. It took a long time, actually, after that. Like I ended up marrying a woman who grew up in the Catholic Church, and then I went through RCIA several years after we were married, and that was what formally brought me into the Catholic Church. But I think from that moment of seeing that mass, in a lot of ways, like I was Catholic in my heart.
Nice. Yeah, like that kind of is so legit. That sense of grief and questioning and being pissed off at God is pretty biblical. Like you see that in the laments and the Psalms and Job and all the way to Jesus on the cross. My God, why are you forsaking me? Is there? And then I don't think it's it's not lost to me that you being captured by the liturgy in a church called the Holy Innocents. There's this biblical story of the like children being slaughtered because there was a power-hungry emperor or king who wanted to get rid of Christ. So that kind of lament of the Holy Innocents and that pain and then being captured by the beauty of liturgy is pretty powerful. It's a very powerful story. Yeah. So you've found yourself kind of immersed in Catholicism and converting to the Catholic Church and finding the liturgy and the theology beautiful and wrapping meaning to your life. And then you also have this kind of fandom of sci-fi, and it led you to write a book that kind of integrates all that together. And so if you could kind of your log line, your pitch, your elevator pitch, you're in a elevator heading back home to St. Louis, and someone says, "Oh, you write a book? What is it? What is your book about?" How would you say that in like 3 sentences?
Oh boy, this is I'm terrible at this.
Yeah.
And
I'm a TV producer at Amazon. I'm I'm like, I want to make your book into a TV show. Pitch it to me. What's your story?
Here's the elevator pitch for Our Lady of the Ardelex. 200 years in the future, we have androids that are human in appearance and behavior. What would happen if they started having religious visions first? And then what would happen if one of them showed up and said that they thought it was possessed? How would the church respond to that? Right?
Those are excellent premises.
And
so good.
And, because it leads to, it leads to theological questions that are really interesting about personhood. And would God ever choose to insult a creature like this? And I don't know. Like, I'm not a theologian. I'm not going to sit here and argue like scientifically yes and theologically yes, it's possible. And here are the 15 reasons why. I just thought it was an interesting story and a way to talk. Like most science fiction, it's really a way to talk about us.
Yeah. That's it. My wife saw me reading the book, and she says, "What are you reading?" I was like, "Well, I'm interviewing this guy for Whole Church and Systematic Geekology," and she knows I like sci-fi. And I was like, she goes, "What is the book about?" And I was like, "Well, it's about an AI who has a religious experience, and people are trying to wrap their heads around whether this thing was hacked or not, or whether it's legit God appearing to these AI or replicants, if you say, from Blade Runner. They look like us, talk like us. How do you know if they are?" And then asking, do they have a soul? Do they have free will? Are they? Did they really have this, or were they hacked? And I think kind of where we are today in our world, whether it's science or the pandemic, is kind of like, oh, we hear this. Is it true? Is it not true? What's going on? How would we react? And I was reading your book, and I was thinking, like, when is this set? Like 50 years in the future, 100 years, and you leave that out for, I don't know, that's intentional, but like halfway through the book, you lift up this event, this kind of worldwide tragedy that happened in China, and you named the date. I'm like, oh, I finally get to know when it is. And it was so good. You held on to that, and it was like, it's 200 years, over 200 years in the future. And then my mind started thinking like, yeah, if technology advanced so fast since 2000 to 2023 in terms of AI and Alexa and iPhones, what would it look like 200 years from now? So I guess a two-part question. One, I'm always interested in this in terms of your concept of this story, where that came, and then how long it took to become print. Like how long is that process of writing? And then, what kind of homework did you do about tech and about what to integrate into your imagination of art that? So first of all, if I wanted to write a book, how long did it take you, and how patient do I need to be?
Okay. So, I mean, what I tell people on this is it was like, 50 years researching,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and then 6 months to write it for me.
Okay.
On this book, which, and it was my first book. And I mean, everybody writes at a different pace. There are writers who churn books out in 30 days, 100,000 words in 30 days. I don't know how they do it, but they do it. And then there are others that take years. I mean, look at George Martin,
Yeah, right.
Hard to argue with his success, but maybe his process leaves a little something to be desired. I don't know.
Right.
Maybe Stephen King's with 1,000 words a day mandatory.
Yeah. I mean, so like it once I started writing it, it kind of flowed because the themes in it, and the idea set that I was dealing with were the things that I've spent my life thinking about. And it was really a matter then of like, okay, well, I gotta, I don't want to just. I love Frank Herbert, but like if there's a critique of Frank Herbert, it's that the characters are just kind of they're sock puppets for him to, express his philosophy. I didn't really want to do that either. I wanted to create real characters and a story that people could relate to, and kind of give the characters the freedom to go in whatever direction they needed to go. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I mean, it was about a 6-month process,
right,
from first page to finish.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's helpful. I think people who want to create stories or get into that, sometimes you're like, I have this dream and it's going to happen like next week or whatever. But there's a long game. It takes a long time. Some people it takes years and years and years. And some, 6 months. That's a good chunk of time to really get this into people's hands. And so you say 50 years of research. Set 200 years in the future. What were some of the things that either inspired you or you dreamt up of, or your imagination in terms of the tech and that integration of faith and science, or science and humanity within this book?
I mean, so I've kind of, worked in and around technology my whole career. I started my first job out of school actually was I wanted to be a writer, and I got an offer to be a writer for a paper in New York, but like the pay was so bad. I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to live in a closet with 15 people and a horde of rats,
Yeah.
And then I got another offer to work for this like kind of weird technology group. And they were incubating 2 internet projects at the time. This was way back in 94.
Yeah.
And one of them, the one I ended up working for was the first free email company. It was called Juno.
Oh, I remember Juno. Okay. I remember Juno. Yes, I do.
The other one was this kind of quirky guy. He was a senior vice president of the bank. He'd go into his office, didn't really make eye contact, but he had like books piled up to the ceiling. And I finally, I was delivering mail, And so I finally asked him one day, what are you doing with all this stuff? And he said, well, I'm trying to figure out how to sell books on the internet. And I was like, well, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard in my life. Like, who would ever buy anything on the internet? And if they were going to buy something, why would it be books? He's like, well, we'll see. It might turn into something.
It might.
And that actually was Jeff Bezos. And like 6 months later, he picked up and went to Seattle and founded Amazon. But I've been around technology a lot. I like technology. I enjoy it. I have my, I have a certain level of skepticism about it,
Sure.
But so the research, a lot of the research just comes out of my professional experience. And then, there's some great books on sort of like, how if we were to develop autonomous, moral agents, right? Like, androids, robots, artificial intelligence that was capable of making moral decisions, how would that happen? There's some really good research and books out there. I read a bunch of that.
Nice.
Read some white papers here and there. I like research.
Yeah.
Fun.
That's good. Yeah, and I think, like as we were talking a little bit earlier, Christensen Seminary, and I'm embedded in a church that's on the doorstep of the University of North Carolina, and the question of bioethics or technology and science, those big questions aren't going anywhere. And so how does the church have conversation with and come to the table to listen and learn, but also raise some good questions to ask those things? And I think that it really shines through in your book, this kind of understanding of it's not just within Catholicism, but there's a global aspect within your book as well. You have, it's not just Roman Catholics that are wrestling with this thing, but you have people who are Muslim, you have secular, you have scientists, you have a good Bond villain in there. Dr. Cheney is like a good Bond villain that I like. But in terms of this global nature, what did you have some background when it comes to like kind of Christian Catholic relations with Islam or those who are Muslim? I think that's a great aspect in terms of talking about not just church unity, whole church, but also like kind of global unity. How do religions who are different have these conversations and healthy conversations with each other as well?
Yeah, I mean, so that was there are a lot of interfaith friendships in this book, right? And there's a couple of characters that I think and I hope represent Islam in a really in a faithful and respectful manner. Because, and it's important to me because, I mean, I personally have a tremendous respect for Muslims and for Islam. I've had really close Muslim friends of mine, okay? And what I've come to believe over the years is that without minimizing the differences, the theological differences, right? And without even minimizing, the kind of historical friction, to put it mildly, between Islam and Christianity. If you were to look today at your average Christian of almost any denomination and your average Muslim anywhere in the world, I think that they have more in common philosophically, ethically, and morally than what separates them. And I would even go so far as to say, and here I'm just going to speak as a Christian in the West, a Christian specifically in what I think is increasingly a post-Christian West.
Yep.
I personally feel more of a spiritual kinship with a practicing Muslim than I do with your average Western secularist. Okay.
Yeah.
And I wanted that to come through in the book because that's just how I feel,
Yeah.
And I hope fervently, I pray fervently that Christians of all denominations and Muslims can get past the doctrinal differences and the historical injustices, that have, I think, happened on both sides and realize that, like we are people of God. We are part of the Abrahamic tradition. Our faith, our way of thinking, of living, of being is in some ways really under attack in the modern world. And we better figure out how to work together.
Yeah.
Right. Because otherwise we're going to get taken out one by one.
Yeah. And I like the common ground. I mean, I think both the Islamic faith and Christianity in the West, we have our spectrum of like hardcore fundamentalists that aren't willing to have any kind of conversations at all. And this is the way it is that can often lead to violence. We saw that in our own country on January 6th. But then you have those who are on the progressive movement, but then you also have those who are kind of like dare to say, we want to open the table to have conversations around faith and science and morality and the common ground that you create in this book, that you're not only talking about science and technology and like AI, but there's also this understanding of like angels and demons. Speak a little bit more of that in terms of possession, because there is common ground within those faiths and within Christianity about, possession, angelic, genies and those kinds of things. Like where did that come from? And then how do you see that kind of emerging out of your story?
Sure. So, I mean, and again, I'll just speak from my own, my own tradition, because I don't know as much, for example, about like the Lutheran kind of view on angelology, or the Baptist view on angelology. But one of the things that attracted me to the Roman Catholic Church was this whole sort of like systemic thought and theology around the spiritual realm, right? And like, for example, one of my favorite prayers is the Chaplet of St. Michael. Absolutely love that prayer. I mean, it's incredibly powerful spiritual weapon that has benefited me on a personal level many, many times in my life. Okay. And I certainly believe in it. I certainly believe that there's an unseen world, and that there, as St. Paul said, we fight against powers and principalities. Okay. Now in Islam, it's really different. First of all, my understanding is that I don't think that it's quite as rigorous or systematized. In other words, there seems to be different strains of thought within Islam. The viewpoint that I take comes really out of the Sufi tradition. The viewpoint in the book is out of the Sufi tradition, which is more mystical. Yeah. And the jinn in Islam are not exactly demons. They actually were like a created race that existed before humanity. They were made from what the Quran calls smokeless fire, which sounds a lot like electricity.
Cool. Hey now.
But they were made of smokeless fire, and they were powerful creatures. But God eventually went to them and said, I've made Adam, and I want you to acknowledge Adam as your superior. And most of them said no. So there was that same sense of rebellion and pride, and fall and the subsequent fall that happened there. And the chief among them was Iblis, who is Shaitan, who is sort of the Muslim equivalent of Satan. So there are different the different power levels. If you want to get into like science fiction terms, you know what I'm saying. Yeah. But
Padawans and Jedis, right?
Yeah, and there are differences. But I wanted to try to to kind of come at this problem. I mean, if I was coming at it from a religious point of view and a scientific point of view, I wanted to make sure that to preserve the level of ambiguity, around it that I thought was necessary for the story to be told. I wanted to bring in that third perspective on it.
Nice. That's really fascinating, because while I was doing my research for this, I found that one of your inspirations for this was the Our Lady of Fatima. And incident is the wrong word to say. That sounds like it's negative. Can you explain for the listeners what that was, what occurred? It was in Spain in 1917, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, it was in Portugal, 1917. Little village called Fatima. 3 illiterate shepherd children had a series of visions of the Virgin Mary. By the way, this place is an interesting place, Fatima. It's named after one of the wives of Muhammad, right? Because it's in the Iberian Peninsula, which was Islamic for many, many years. But even before that, there's always been this kind of like spiritual energy to the place, I guess I would put, for lack of a better word. Anyway, the shepherd children had this vision. This was at a time when Portugal was under a Masonic government, which was rabidly anti-Catholic and anti-religious. So the secular authorities were doing everything they possibly could to suppress the church and traditional beliefs. They went to great lengths to try to discredit these children. At one point, the Virgin told Lucia, who was the oldest of the 3, on this date, you can tell them that come and stand here and there will be a miracle and they will witness, and then I will do this so that they will believe. And so everybody got real excited about it, because they were like, we're going to prove these 3 little, idiot children wrong. 100,000 people show up, and there was something called the miracle of the sun, and it's been widely reported. And look, I mean, you're going to have like anything that happens, like in the world, right? You're going to have people who say it didn't happen, or it did happen, or it was just a natural phenomenon that people ascribe supernatural value to. But I mean, something clearly happened that day, right? Because it was reported worldwide. It was reported in the secular press in Portugal at the time. And it was pretty dramatic. The Virgin gave these children a series of what you would call secrets, which are really just mysteries. And they were told to reveal them at certain points in time. And the third one is the one that's kind of been the most controversial, because it's scary stuff. It's apocalyptic. It was political. It had a lot to do with communism and the Bolshevik revolution in Russia, and the consequences of not of the church not really standing up to that on a spiritual level. And the church hasn't necessarily always acted in accordance with Our Lady's will on this, interestingly enough. And then there's the controversy of, well, was the third secret already fulfilled? Church's official position is that it was, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'll say for anyone who wants more information on this, there's a really great episode from the Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World about this.
Yes.
That man pursues things from both science and faith, reason and faith. Yeah, he is an incredible man. Oh. I listen to him religiously, if that's not blasphemous. So, yeah, I would definitely check that out if you want to learn more about this occurrence, this miracle.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like there was another writer that I got really into named Malachi Martin, and he was a Jesuit priest, scholar in linguistics. He was an exorcist. He worked in the Vatican Secret Service. He was a periti to some of the top cardinals during Vatican II. So he was, like an insider's insider. And he claimed to have seen the third secret, said it was terrifying, was under oath not to reveal it. But he described Fatima as kind of the fulcrum point of modern history, of 20th century history. And if you look at history in sacramental terms, I mean, from a Catholic perspective, if you were to look at history in sacramental terms, I think that's hard to argue with. I mean, I sort of agree. So the question is, like with all prophecy, is it for a moment in time or is it for all time?
Right. Yeah. And I think, our modern day prophetic books, whether it's apocalyptic Walking Dead or sci-fi or The Expanse, they kind of hold up a mirror to kind of help people kind of ask some big questions and think through the existential questions, like you said. But there's some real things that happen in our world that people are captured by, and the miracle and the mystery of Fatima is there. I remember reading about that in seminary, being just captivated by the story. And so your book, again, like it integrates like technology and what tech and AI could look like 200 years from now, but there's also this religious component that's still there to talk about how the church will react, how other religions react, how their political entities would react. And as you said, like there's a reaction. You do a good job. Like there's this transhumanism of like, how do humans merge ourselves with tech? What are the ethical dilemmas with that? How does it help humanity? How could it hinder? How could someone manipulate that and take advantage of that? So all those things are there. But I love this story of like you have a scientist who I think she's a physicist, right? And then like who I guess was her fiance. They almost had a priest who's an exorcist. They're talking about, there's this dialogue of faith and science together, and how do they come together and have understanding, but also disagreements. Talk more about that, because I'm fascinated. Because my own church, we know the Higgs boson particle, the God particle. Well, where you lift up, there's another particle out there that physicists discover in this fictional hadron collider called the Lucifer particle. And actually, there's a member of my church who's a physicist at Duke who helped discover the Higgs boson. And I was able to go on my sabbatical at CERN to go get a tour of this stuff. So all this stuff is there, and he really helped kick off our kind of faith and science deep dive within our congregation. So yeah, there's speculation there, but there's also real research. Like, one, talk about how this comes in your book, and then why do you think this is important for the church to continue to think through these things?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. There's a lot in that.
I know. I threw a lot in there.
Why do I think it's important for the church to continue to engage in this stuff? Because, we were given the faculty of reason. It's a gift from God. I think this is just a personal view, and I certainly don't speak on behalf of all Catholics on this or anybody other than myself.
Right.
But, one of the things that's become very interesting to me as I've gotten older is this idea that like there are real limits to reason. There just are. There are things that can be understood at the heart level that are pretty darn near impossible to explain just using pure reason. And there's a whole tradition, like, for example, in Eastern Orthodoxy around this, that like, I think if you would talk to like some of our Orthodox brothers and sisters, they would say where the West really went wrong, and they would blame us Catholics for it. And then they'd probably let you guys off the hook, but say, you're just
maybe
you
not.
inherited these sins. I don't know, but and I say that with love because my goodness,
Absolutely.
Protestants are already too far gone, anyways.
But they would say that we really started to go wrong when we fully embraced scholasticism and over elevated reason, the faculty of reason, and specifically stopped understanding what the purpose of reason was. The purpose of reason, they might say, is not to understand the mind of God, which is not knowable. The purpose of reason is to restrain our appetites. It's a nice benefit that we get, that we can also understand the world through it. That's a gift. That's a grace. That's all it is. So that's a theme that that runs through the book, and will definitely run through the sequels. It's like, how much of the nature of this reality can we really understand through reason and through breaking apart particles and finding ever and ever smaller particles.
Yeah.
And it's not just, here's the thing that I find so interesting about it, guys. It's not really just a religion versus science question. If you really dig into the science, okay, and you listen to people like David Bohm, who was in my opinion, one of the great thinkers in quantum theory of the 20th century, and an atheist, I think. He would say we aren't even close to understanding this stuff. In fact, it's not going to be possible for us to understand it using the tools and mindsets that we have today. Right? There's an implicate order, he would say. There's an enfolded order. And we can't get beyond that membrane. We can't unfold that last layer to understand what exactly it is that gives rise to all of the things, that we see in this universe.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There's a sense of where kind of Newtonian physics, had this kind of special order and everything's kind of planned out, and it gave rise to kind of the clockmaker deism, if you believed in that or not. And then we started getting into kind of quantum physics, and we've discovered real fast how weird things are and that things don't match up. And so if people are like, yeah, how could you believe in the resurrection? That's so weird. I'm like, well, have you looked at quantum physics? That's even weirder, you know?
The cat is dead and it's alive at the same time in an infinite number of possible states.
And we see the Hubble telescope, and now we have the James Webb, and it's expanding our universe, the mystery of the universe. And for me, it expands kind of the mystery of God and captures my imagination in a way that it hadn't before. So again, in your book, well, I think we just heard Andrew talk about that there's going to be more. There's going to be sequels. He's writing more. I'm excited about that. We'll talk about that in a minute. What's next after this particular book? But I think, again, you play around, not to give spoilers to the end, but there is a scientist who is skeptical and has skepticism as kind of her base, and then you have a priest who's kind of turned down the road of faith, and they're working together to literally save the world. And so I love that they come together, and they have banter, they have humor, they have the tension is on the line. We're not going to get rid of the tension of faith and science, but you know what it can do? It can create a deeper understanding of how we are as humans and what this universe means. And it's going to create awesome music on that guitar string or cello that we'll sing out a beautiful song. And so those two working together, I really thought the book, them two literally trying to save the world, working together, was pretty daggone good, and loved how you played with that idea.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So if there was a particular I'm not going to go down the road of what's the nature of a soul? Could AI ever have a soul? Rational. Read the book. You can go down that. You can reach out to Andrew on Twitter. He can answer your questions about what's the nature of a soul. But if there was one question that you would hope people would kind of wrestle with or pay attention to while reading this book, or for future books and conversation within church, what would be the main question you would hope people would take away or wrestle with?
Do I really know everything that I think I know? Where do my beliefs, where do my ideas about the nature of reality really come from? On what authority do they rest? Right? For most people, for most of us, and I'll put myself in this category for sure. I mean, people don't understand quantum mechanics. People who invented quantum mechanics don't understand quantum mechanics. Mm-hmm. David Bohm, who was one of the fathers of the theory, said, or I think it was David, it might have been somebody else, said, Richard Feynman, I think it might have been, said, if you claim that you understand quantum mechanics, you absolutely, without a question, do not understand quantum mechanics.
You've discredited yourself immediately.
Exactly. And, so really, ultimately, for 99.9999% of the population, whether you're religious or not religious, it's resting on authority, right? Which is fine. I mean, that's kind of how it always has been. But authority implies a certain level of priesthood, a control over, meaning and truth.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably worth questioning that,
Yeah.
Hope I don't get in trouble with my church for saying that.
No, I think, I think you're right.
But I think, we're called to question things too. I mean, that's one of the things that drew me to the church, right?
Well, that's one of the things I think that Christians as a whole have done a huge disservice to us, is that we've brought up the issue of doubt as a negative thing always. It's like, that's a terrible way to look at it. Like some of the periods of growth I've had that were the most fruitful when I was doubting. And it's like, well, let me look into what I actually believe and go, oh, this is why I do. Not because my dad believes in it, not because my mom does or my pastor does, but because the God of the universe created this world and said, out of all the idiots in the world, I want you to work with me. That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
Amen.
Faith and doubt are beautiful dance partners, and I think they work hand in hand. They can be in the same room together and have a conversation and have a drink, have a meal, and have a good conversation. And I think that's kind of what we're called to do. And the same way with faith and science and reason, and all those can be in the same room together to have a conversation. Doesn't mean that there aren't disagreements or there's a tension on the line within my own family, within my own self. There's tension and disagreements of those things going on. I think it's important to keep those on. And most of what we've learned in our work with faith and science, the most of the time there's hardcore conflict is when someone feels like their authority or power or money is going to be taken away from them. So again, the conflict within the Middle Ages of like the church and Galileo was mostly around like scared that they're going to lose power and prestige and relevance and money. And then that we still see that today too. It's like, what if but instead of coming with a posture of humility and learning and listening, that is where it goes. And I love, again, going back to your book, like this, it provides a different setting. Sci-fi often does that. It provides a sandbox, kind of play around with these mind experience and thought experiments of what would happen if this would happen or that would happen. How can they have a conversation? So it kind of disarms us to kind of lay down our defensiveness to kind of explore this in a way that is sci-fi. So yeah, good job. So tell us, so what's next? Like, so there will be a sequel. There will. Is knocking on your door for a TV series. It's going to be a movie one day. What do you know?
I don't expect that. That would be great. Anybody wants to call me, they can find me on Twitter. But no, I there is definitely a sequel and probably a third book in this series with these characters continuing this story. The working title, I'm probably about 25-30% of the way through that one right now. Nice. The working title for it is The Cloud of Unknowing, which I don't know if you guys probably have read it, but for anybody in your audience who hasn't, it's Cloud of Knowing is a book by an anonymous medieval monk it's a manual for contemplative prayer. And I think it's like one of the greatest works in the history of Western literature. I mean, it's like, nice. I can't believe more people haven't read this. It is so good. It's so funny. It's like written in the voice of like your favorite uncle, like kind of grabbing you by the ear, being like, look, you idiot, like I'm trying to help you. Could you just stop being such a moron for 5 seconds and listen? And it's like, the personality just comes through it so much anyway. But the Cloud of Unknowing is kind of the theme going into this next phase of the book of like, we are going into a space of, not necessarily being able to see too far in front, behind, above, or below us. It's hard. I mean, writing, this is a not an easy book or story to tell because I don't want to get it wrong. Like I feel a certain level of responsibility to God.
Right.
On this, like I don't want to write heresy. I'm not interested in writing heresy.
Right.
Okay. I don't want to lead anybody away from faith, but I'm not really that interested in preaching. So it's like it's a little bit slower going. and I'm having to take breaks from it a lot more than I thought I would. Now, the good news for me is like in the breaks, I wrote another book, which is already out in a totally different series.
Okay.
And now I'm about halfway through another book in that series.
What's the name of that series, Andrew?
That series is called it's Planet Gallywood, and it's a satire of Hollywood. It's kind of like The Truman Show meets The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Beautiful.
Okay,
Beautiful.
and it's just really fun. I mean, it deals with some serious themes, but it's like fun and light and just a blast to write. So like it's like I'm like a kid who's like, well, can I have the ice cream before I eat my liver?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, you can have a bite of ice cream. So I have a bite of the ice cream. I'm like, well, that was really good. I think I'm going to have more of that ice cream.
Yeah. Well,
as a fellow writer, I completely understand, especially coming from a religious viewpoint of like, I want to represent God completely with what I'm doing, but I don't want to write a sermon.
Right.
Now, how do I like wrestle those two things? It's so difficult sometimes because I have a point like, Jesus is the answer, but like that shouldn't be, like I said, it shouldn't be a sermon. And like I shouldn't be beating people over the head with an anvil, and it's really difficult to do.
Well, I think you're never going to persuade anybody like that, right? Like, how futile is that? But I also it's just not what I set out to do. But at the same time, like what you really don't want to do also, and I'm sure you can relate to this, Christian, is like, I don't want to lead anybody in the wrong direction either.
Oh, absolutely. So, I better make sure what I'm saying is right.
Yeah. I think that posture of humility goes a long way. As long as you're upfront with that, I think, I have a friend of mine that we want to, we have an idea for a comic book and a graphic novel that's sci-fi and it has some spiritual elements to it. And it's like, is everything, and some of it smacks of like Gnosticism. And I'm like, oh no, I don't want to like lead people down the road of like Gnosticism. But your plan is like, look, I don't speak for all of Christianity. I don't speak for all of Lutheranism. I don't speak, most of the time I don't even speak all for my family or even myself. There's times within me. So like that posture of humility that we're in this process of growing and becoming, that we're learning along the way, that sci-fi novels, comics, video game can help us kind of explore certain things. If you go down a road, it's like, that doesn't necessarily true. It's just something, an idea I was playing around with. We'll see what sticks. But I do think that posture of humility of saying like, there's more that I don't know that I do, and I'm going to play around with this in community with the church family, with our family we have in whole church, the family we have in systematic geekology. We're playing around with these ideas together. We can hold each other accountable if we're getting off base. We're like, I've thought of this before. So I think that's all helpful. So you have permission to have the freedom to explore the imagination and see what happens.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So Andrew, as we wrap up here, where can people find you and where can people find your book and how can they get in touch with you?
Sure. So the book is Our Lady of the Artilects. It's on Amazon. Currently, I think exclusively on Amazon. Every once in a while, you can choose to publish exclusive on Amazon or have it go wide. And every once in a while, I turn off the exclusive and it's available elsewhere. But right now, it's just on Amazon. The other book that I mentioned is called The Final Season, and it's part of a series called Planet Gallywood. So it's Planet Gallywood #1. You can find me on Twitter at Andrew Gillsmith, and I'm on Goodreads, where I love interacting with readers. Goodreads, for those of you who don't know, it's like Facebook for book lovers. It's where people get together and review books and create book clubs and talk about books and talk about writing and get into all kinds of arguments with each other on the side.
Nice. Yeah. So you're on Twitter. Have you found, I enjoy Twitter, but have the trolls come out for you? Have you had good experiences? Are there people reaching out to you about, hey, I like your book. What do you
95% positive.
Nice.
Yeah, I will say,
positive.
while I was doing my research on this with the hour I got to prepare, thanks, Joshua, I saw your Reddit AMA, and I've got to say you handled that really well because that was one of the most negative things I've ever seen in my life.
Oh, wow.
I wasn't expecting that, but I would do it again. I'm not like, I'm not a priest. I'm not the Pope. I'm not a pastor. I'm not in seminary. I'm just a guy. I'm just a dude, believe certain things and I'm writing. So sure, come after me, beat me up. That's fine. I don't really have any interest in arguing or insulting anyone.
Right. That's kind of the risk of putting yourself out there and putting your work out there. There's be all kinds of opinionated folks. And then how do we posture ourselves and posture ourselves the way that Jesus did in terms of seeing people interact with people is a good model. So, Andrew, thanks so much for being with us and sharing your novel and your imagination and your stuff. How we can't recommend this book enough for our listeners out there. Hit us up on systematicecology.org, whole church. Both have Patreons. We both have a lot of great episodes coming up with a lot of great guests and themes. And so let us know what you're reading. Let us know what you're thinking. If you read this book and you have a question that we didn't ask, you can hit up Andrew on Twitter and hit us up on our social medias as well. So again, thanks for listening. Go find this book. Can't recommend it enough. And remember, share the faith, share the geek.
Thank you for listening to the Whole Church Podcast. Remember, you can always go for $3 a month on patreon.com, where you'll get extra bonus episodes, discount on our store merchandise, as well as discounts on upcoming events, like our Every Tribe, Denomination, and Tongue event, coming May 11th through 13th. Join us again next week, where we'll be having another roundtable discussion, this time talking about the particularities of our faiths and why we need to hold on to some things that make us different.